Okay, well, welcome everyone to this episode. I have a fantastic privilege today of interviewing Daniel Hood from the United Kingdom, and he's got a fascinating background, which he'll tell us about in a moment, but he's the founder of an organisation called Thought Culture, and he is a civilization cycles analyst or biohistorian, where he studies the rise and fall of civilizations, both the past, the present and the future, and tracks people and what happens through these times. And so we're going to be talking about the rise and fall of civilizations. And I think it's a really important topic because many people that I talk to when we're discussing the Western world and where it's heading, many people are obviously very concerned about the direction that it's on. And certainly the last 3 years where things got turned upside down, people are increasingly concerned about where this is all heading and sense that there's something not quite right. And so it's a great privilege to have with us Daniel today. So thanks for joining us today, Daniel.
Hello, Alex. Thank you. Yeah, ex-military, served in the armed forces for several years, and so I was young, finished my A levels, and rather than go off to university, I joined the armed forces. So they captured me early. There I was a young officer, and so saw tours of duty or I served before, during, and after 9/11. So that was a huge kind of tipping point, I guess, for me. Warning shot across the kind of the bow of civilization. So served in Afghanistan, Iraq, studied finance, and then from there I worked in the city for a while, in the world of investment banking, and that was before, during, and after 2008 a global financial crisis. So I had the kind of military aspect, the geopolitical aspect, and then obviously the financial aspect, and both those industries really left me even more despondent and asking more questions than ever before. And then I worked overseas in the Middle East for a bit in the world of technology. And of course, that the Middle East has been has always been a kind of interesting place to work in and around. I've always had a passion. I mean, as a young child, I read the Thucydides, the history of the Peloponnesian War. I think I was 14 at the time. And I've always had an interest in deep history. I always found it fascinating how kind of spectacular civilizations, successful, big and powerful civilizations, what happened to them, why did they rise, why did they fall, and so it's just been a passion, really, and I found that kind of that passion and interest has got a little bit more serious over the last few years, and
as you were watching it unfold.
Yeah, that's right. Things are unfolding, or cycling, and we'll talk about that, but it's happening much faster than some of the kind of more ancient civilizations like Greece and particularly Rome. I think Rome elicits such fascination because there we can see the kind of this whole story, can't we, from kingdom on the hill to republic to empire to footnote in history, and so Greece had this distinct cycle, Rome had this distinct cycle. And, if you were to bring somebody or transport someone 1,000 years later into the past, into Rome, 1,000 years earlier, they would probably die of a heart attack, thinking they were either on another planet or they've been transported into the future. So,
absolutely.
That's really the essence of the cycle, is this, that we can go backwards and we can stay down for a very long time. And this is normal, in civilizational.
I mean, the more people I talk to, the more, a lot of people sense there's something wrong. And I mean, I look at it, because I'm a father, I've got 4 kids, 14 and under. And I just think, oh man, what's this world they're going to inherit? And the thing about COVID, and I don't know how bad it was in the UK, but Australia was just this authoritarian, like it lost the plot overnight. So Australia has this supposed culture of being she'll be right and everything's okay. It was almost the antithesis of that
Right, right. Yeah, I think I noticed that particularly, and I'm very good friends with you. Probably heard of him, with Jim Penman. He's the owner of Jim's Group.
Oh yeah, yeah,
in Australia. So he built that massive franchise,
yeah,
the
yeah,
world and all the rest of it. So
yeah.
he actually, what a lot of people don't realize about Jim is he's also, he's a doctor. He's also a research scientist, and
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
oh yeah, well, much of what I write is based off of the work that he does. So he is author, or lead scientist, but behind biohistory, which is probably one of the greatest theories that I've ever read, into the rise and fall of civilizations. And what was interesting was we speak regularly, we email and correspond, and he was very vocal about, he obviously he's a devout Christian. I think he's got 12 kids or something, and
oh wow.
So yeah, oh yeah. So and he, I think I forget. I think it was with Dan Andrews, which
Oh yeah, he was.
yeah. So
He's Victoria. He was the shocker.
Right.
Oh.
He and I think that and I think that like I always say, I think there was the world before the pandemic, and then there was the world during and after, where most people were like, oh, it's all a bit of a conspiracy, and after the pandemic, I think a lot of people, it was like a meteor strike, wasn't it? That, hang on,
Yeah.
what on earth, why are we copying China? Why are we ceding our leadership role in terms of sovereignty and freedom and liberty, and all the traits and values that kind of made us so great in the first place? To me, it seems we subliminally handed over power to this CCP. We kind of looked at the CCP and we thought, wow, okay, let's copy them. And
yeah,
I think the moment
that's what it looks like.
I think that's what happened. I think that it started in Italy, and maybe some of the kind of authoritarians or health specialists or whatever. It's difficult to tell them apart these days. They kind of said, well, we can't get away with it here, and then they did, and then and then others copied them. So it's very
it was like a trial. It was like a trial. Like, it was like we're all guinea pigs and they're all trying different things.
Yeah, it's very, I have a great book called Politics and Apocalypse by Robert Hamilton Kelly, and it's titled Studies in Violence, Mimesis and Culture, on René Girard. And he talks about mimesis, particularly mimetic theory, this idea that we're creatures of imitation, and we don't know, because we it's kind of we don't really know how to use our brains and how to think independently, and with sovereignty and so forth. So we look to others, right? We defer. We're creatures of imitation, and we like to think that we're autonomous, but we're not, and I think that's very disconcerting. And I think that's what happened. I think that we looked at China in a way. I think there are I call them the blue tribe, those kind of on the left, that they kind of they look to China for inspiration, and I think they're increasingly trying to copy cancel culture. You've got China, it's the social credit score. So you've got all of this kind of memetics going on, and I think that the pandemic was part of that.
It's frightening though, because it's basically leading to this situation where there's only one narrative that's allowed for anything. And you mentioned Daniel Andrews, right? And to give you an idea of how bad it is, he passed this bill about 2 years ago called the Conversion Therapy Bill, whereby if you're a Christian minister and you were to pray for somebody who's gay, that they wouldn't be gay anymore, you get 10 years in jail.
Right.
Praying for them.
Yeah.
And you just think, this is nuts.
Yeah. But, I would expect to see what we're seeing now, as a civilization cycles analyst or kind of student of civilizational mechanics, what we're seeing now is not a surprise. It's predictable. It's predictable. We can to really understand what's going on. Not only do you need to look back in time, but you also need to turn inwards. And I think that's where you need to be grounded both in faith and reason. I think if you're comfortable in both worlds, you get a more complete picture of reality. And I think it's really important. And you know, we are a tired civilization. We've been going for hundreds and hundreds of, you know, think about it. The West, I mean, we've reigned supreme for 400 years. Anglo-Saxon world, you know, Britain, America for maybe 200 years. The liberal world order for 30 years, a generation, not even a generation. And all of that is going into reverse. And there, you know, after America, who else is there? It's
nothing.
There's no one else. You know, so I think that we're really struggling to kind of reconcile with these biblical changes that are going on, and that's why I'm a big believer that, you know, when we see these kind of millenarian kind of changes and you know, messianic changes, so on and so forth that are happening, go back to basics, you know. And that's why I keep it, you know, I talk about kind of biblicalism and Bitcoin, right? So and it kind of segues nicely into that whole world. I think that, you know, go back to your core values and principles, and we know that Christianity works because look at what we achieved post Rome, right? We far surpassed Rome. But what I say to people is, you know, this idea that we can save civilization, that's where I kind of push back a little bit, and maybe some people, you know, kind of think, oh, you're a bit, you know, pessimistic and you should be optimistic. But then I said, well, that's not really a Christian position to take.
No, absolutely.
Christianity doesn't believe in optimism. That's a new fad. It's kind of this, you know, it's like Oswald Spengler called optimism cowardice. I'm more hope and faith and a promise that however bad things are, it's not going to stay like that. And we can always, you know, if you think of St. Benedict, for example, when he was born, when Rome had begun to, the saints begun to disintegrate, you know, he heads for the hills, right? The Benedict option, right? Rod Dreher's Benedict option, and you know, he kind of maintained the light of civilization, and you know, we had the monasteries, and that was where we were able to kind of just branch out again and help to rebuild temperamental scaffolding. You know, if you think about it, you know, Britain, for example, here, I mean, you know, not far from where I am, the Vikings sailed up the Humber River, right? The pagan, you know, so I think that, like I said, you know, the tide is going out for us as a civilization. We're exhausted. We've run out of ideas.
We invent problems now.
Right, exactly. And I think that we've become so successful, and therein lies the seeds, you know, of our predicament, or the seed, you know, the kind of like the seeds, you know, when you see incredible wealth and kind of dense urbanization over time, this is going to impact you. And as you know, in finance, obviously, this is the third generation, the generational wealth problem. So you know, the kind of, you know, civilizations rise in working boots, and they always decline in pink fluffy silk slippers. So we're
it's very true.
And it's
so true.
It's really a simple, you know, and the more that because we've been so successful for so long, you know, kind of elites, the luxury beliefs, the whole Christianity thing, Bible, we don't need any of that nonsense. They discard it. You know, that then kind of passes through a few generations, and now liberalism has regressed, collapsed, even more so. You know, we had Christianity that collapsed into liberalism when we became super successful, and now liberalism has collapsed into kind of this woke phenomenon where we can't even agree on what a man and woman is anymore, and this transhumanism.
What I say to people is, I think as a society you can survive an economic downturn, but you can't survive wokeism. Like, it's just it's so insane that you can't survive it.
Yeah, I think to me, it's just it's what I would expect to see at this late stage of civilization. It's an indicator that, you know, we've reached. I mean, if you think about the evolution of culture, obviously we begin as a culture, we kind of grow into this huge, sophisticated civilization. As Rome, you know, as happened with Rome, it began as a kingdom on a hill. You know, it kind of grew into this sophisticated republic. regressed into empire. And then it just, completely fell apart and disintegrated. And we saw the whole woke phenomenon back then in Greece and Rome, and we're seeing it again with the modern West. But our fall will be way faster and more complete than anything Rome experienced, because if you think about it, we far surpassed Rome in terms of industrialization. Like, they never industrialized, whereas we did. And so I think that our fall will be, it will be long and it will be spectacular. And I think it's begun. I think the economic decline.
I think. Well, there's a guy. I don't know if you follow him, but he's an economist in the US. I think he's based in Florida, called Martin Armstrong.
Right.
And
right. Yeah.
His website's Armstrong Economics.
Yeah.
And
that's right. Yeah.
He is fascinating. So he reckons by 2032 the West will collapse. And obviously, he talks about all sorts of things, war. What's fascinating about him, he studies cycles, but he's obviously he's got this computer system that he's loaded all the history into effectively, and it studies cycles. So it's basically all about cycles. And he reckons by 2032 the West will have imploded and China will be running the show, basically.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that China, it's interesting if you think. You don't really need to put it into a computer, because
you don't.
If you study, all you need to do is just open a few books. I've studied all of the great scholars, sages, scribes, historians. You've got Thucydides, History of the Peloponnesian War. You've got Sima Khan, the kind of Cynic scholar. You've got Evan Khaldun, right, the Mukaddimah. So you've got Oswald Spengler. You've got Arnold Toynbee, Jim Penman, which probably but his theory is biohistory. And basically, it's almost like a scientific version of the Bible, right? Because if you open the Bible, hey, it's all in there. Human nature.
It is, absolutely.
It's all in there, right? Start to finish. You can read the Old Testament, the New Testament. It doesn't matter. It's all in there. It's all the prophets, Jesus, Moses.
I think you hit the nail on the head, though. It's human nature. It's just that
It's all, and I think that's what Christianity did so well. And it's a paradox, isn't it? Because we're told that, Christianity is a load of rubbish, the Bible's a load of rubbish. Actually, Christianity in the Bible is more truthful than a lot of the secular nonsense that, the Richard Dawkins and all these types kind of spout today. And we're told that science is the truth and we should follow the science. And actually, all that's nonsense. And I'm not bashing all science, because I'm a big fan of people like Richard Feynman, and the great physicists and the stuff that Elon Musk does. There are brilliant minds from Western civilization, Judeo-Christian civilization, who are fanatical about the truth for the truth's sake, right? And they discover laws, and so I think that's what I've become. I'm like a sociological seismograph, really, and very sensitive with detecting tremors and earthquakes. But you're right, you don't need to have a PhD or to be. You just
to see,
you can see
it. Yeah, you can see it. But there is still a lot of denial, though. That's what also amazes me. Like, there's that pervasive, we should be optimistic, whereas I take the view of being realistic. So I've been proactive because I see this as just a house of cards.
I focus on core areas. I'm a big believer in just keep things simple. 4 or 5 big things. So that's why Bible, whole cultural technology aspect of it. So we know Christianity works and it's a proven cultural technology. And when the shit hits the fan, so to speak, we can fall back on. We've got our spiritual shield. Put on the armor of God, right, and bring it on. Like, we've been through it before. We've got the cultural memory. It's like there's nothing we can go through that we haven't seen before that we can't cope with. With biblical wisdom, simple as that. And then the second, but obviously we're in the 21st century now, and what's different is here we are in the information economy where we can transmit ideas and communicate, and we can build networks, and we don't need to be in the same geographical location. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic, and that's where the whole Bitcoin standard and network comes into it, because I see the parallels between, if you think about Rome, it began to wobble. you had this cultural technology, weird cultural technology in the farthest reaches of empire, some place called Israel. The Jews were there, pain in the arse. The Romans had to deal with them all the time. And then all of a sudden you saw this kind of derivative of Judaism emerge, kind of this thing called Christianity, right? And Jesus and so on and so forth, and the prophets. And the kind of pagan Romans just dismissed it, didn't they? At first, they laughed at this, and then they thought, "Hang on, what's this? So it's a problem, it's a threat. Let's persecute." But it didn't stop because there's a truth to Christianity. Given the environment that they were living in at that time, remember they were coming to the end of 1,000 years of Western Roman history. Byzantine Empire split off, etc. And then Christianity, suddenly became, it just suddenly started to skyrocket, didn't it? So, and I see parallels between Christianity as this ethereal cultural technology, kind of gift from God, and Bitcoin, which I would call God's currency. Because if you're going to create perfect money, that's incorruptible, distributed, decentralized, power back to the people, you would come up with something like Bitcoin. And so that's why I try and explain to people that you don't look at Bitcoin day to day, year on year, at the price gyrations. You treat it as a generational asset, right? That's going to be here long after.
Like gold in that sense.
Right, like gold. But if you think about it, Bitcoin it's a network. You're buying into the network, and also unlike gold can be confiscated, can't it? And it's not. It's kind of, even though gold is always going to stand the test of time, there's something about Bitcoin which is really, really interesting. You can basically hold it offline.
You can hold it off platform. It's going to be interesting to see how they're going to try and shut it down. So to me, if you look at the US and the US, Australia and places like that, they're going to try and block it so you won't be able to convert it back into normal currency through the banking system. You can see they're going to try and
there's no question that they're going to set the sights on, because it's but if you think about it, even China tried to ban Bitcoin, but you can't ban it because you literally have to close down the internet and shut down computers. It's distributed everywhere, and you and I can transact, and the authorities have got no idea. We can do it peer to peer.
We can take it on a plane with you too. You can take $1 million of it on a plane with you through a storage facility.
Any denomination, million, 200 million. And if you think about it, this is what I try to explain to people. If you look at, I'm a big fan of Michael Saylor, and he just took his cash pile, didn't he? Corporate cash pile, and just turned it into the Bitcoin network, and he's outperformed all of these Goliaths in his industry because of the relationship that he's got with Bitcoin. And if you think about it, let's say there are 50, 60 millionaires, millionaires in the world in the fiat realm, right? There's 8 billion people on the planet. We know that the empire is disintegrating. We know that we're starting to see de-dollarization. It's beginning to accelerate. I believe that the next couple of months it will become quite clear that Joe Biden, the kind of liberal, I call them the blue tribe, will have completely ballsed up their conflict with Moscow in Ukraine, and that will be another major meteor that will accelerate, because other countries will begin to gain the confidence that, hey, we don't need these idiots anymore. Why do we need the dollar to trade? Right, and they're weaponizing the dollar anyway. And it does seem that I call them the blue tribe, the kind of pagan tribe. They've lost the media. Elon Musk came along with 40 odd billion and said, thanks very much, I'm taking Twitter. So they've got diminishing returns there. They can't cancel the way that they used to do a few years ago. So the only tools really that they've got left is the military component. They've balls that up because Russia,
they've lost every war since World War II, pretty much.
and it's true, because I used to serve. I served as an officer in the British Army for several years. So, and I was shipped out. That was before, during, and after 9/11. So, to me, that was kind of the first warning shot across the bow of my civilization. For a lot of people that you'll speak to, especially in the financial realm, they'll probably tell you that it was 2008, right, the global financial crisis, that it was this big awakening moment for them. And then later it'll be, the pandemic. So you've got, for me, it was the before, during, and after 9/11 that was the first meteor strike or warning shot across the bow that things weren't quite right.
Yeah.
And then
for me, it was the GFC. For me,
Yeah.
that's when I woke up and went, hang on a minute. This is
Right.
just the direction of this is
Correct. And
disastrous long term.
Correct. And I think for most people in finance, it makes sense that it would be the global financial crisis because, I had the military component, the geopolitical component, I was in Iraq, Afghanistan, but don't forget that you had the technology, kind of Ben Bernanke load interest rates to kind of next to zero, which was the first signal, free money, etc. All this kind of financial engineering and profligacy. And obviously that then created this huge bubble, didn't it? You had 9/11, he dropped interest rates, this huge kind of bubble. You had, the kind of incredible rise of the subprime sector, which was a load of nonsense, wasn't it? Because you literally had people who should not have been getting mortgage. I mean, in Britain, you had Northern Rock that was handing out like 125% of the value of your property.
Yeah,
insane.
That's crazy. No, we had similar in Australia. Yeah, no, it's mad.
You could self-certify your income. You had, it was absolutely, and I studied finance at school, actually, as I was serving in the military, and then when I left, I went into finance and worked in the city for a bit, and began to understand, these mortgage-backed securities. I actually worked for Investec for a bit, and so
interesting background.
Yeah, well, that gave me a good grounding in, first of all, obviously I'm, kind of Judeo-Christian. So I went to Sunday school as a kid. I was raised in the kind of biblical realm. And then
I was going to ask you, I wasn't sure through your posts.
Yeah.
Because obviously you're pro-Christian. I wasn't sure yourself where you actually sat in the.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. So you'll probably find it quite interesting. I am literally Judeo-Christian civilization personified. And people, what on earth do you mean by that? Well, my mother was born in Jerusalem, so I which is incredible. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand that, or aren't aware of that. And my sorry, that's just my partner one moment. And my father, his grandparents were good old-fashioned Church of England, so kind of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, but they were devout Christians, So
it's collapsing as well, the Church of England. Boy, oh boy.
Oh well, it's just a joke. But I kind of went to Sunday school, but I'm more on the kind of Christianity spectrum. But what's interesting, I'm becoming more. It's more. I'm quite comfortable in the Orthodox realm. So I think there's something to be said for Orthodox Christianity. And there's something more authentic about it, especially now the Church of England is completely corrupted to the core.
It's just they don't even believe the Bible. I mean, far out. It's just dribble. It's just dribble.
It's just complete dribble. So I think that there's this yearning for, I call it kind of biblicalism. I mean, how can you even have Christianity without biblicalism? I just don't understand. Yeah. It's not Christianity, is it?
It's not. I mean, it's trying to appease the world, but means it's totally irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant. Yeah. And like I said, I'm a big believer. Oswald Spengler talked about this, and it was actually the end of the West. It was mistranslated from German into English. And I think somebody did it because perhaps they thought, it was a bit too pessimistic. So we'll just say the decline of the West, in the hopes we can turn it around. But it's actually mistranslated. It should be the end of the West. But he talks about this kind of second wave of religiousness. And you could argue that the woke phenomenon is a religion. I think that liberalism is a religion, secularism is a religion, but definitely wokeness is a kind of a fanatical. But I think that we'll go back to.
I would argue, and climate change. I always say to people, climate change is a religion. Right. It's
no question. Yeah, that's also a huge. And even if it's true, right? Let's say this is what I always push back and say, look, even if climate change was true. Right, and there was a red button that said, should we press it and stop all fossil fuel usage? Well, no, because you've got to understand the laws of physics. The only reason we've been able to have this industrial, technological, informational economy is because of fossil fuels, right? Oil and gas.
Absolutely.
The moment we come away from hard commodities and energy, and then we will not survive. It's just, there's no two ways about it. And go tell the hauliers and the truckers. And this is where I think Christianity has given so much in terms of civilization, and why we were able to rebuild to new and improved and spectacular heights. It helped us to lay the foundations for scientific thought, and that's why we saw such incredible productivity and success and innovation and discovery, because of Christianity, because of biblicalism and the truth. It really, the Bible really is the kind of it gave us the soul of Western civilization, and the foundational aspects of civilization. And the moment we started to screw with those foundations, then the house simply cannot stand, as you said earlier. And I think that I think that what's happened is that we've seen this whole woke phenomenon is a detachment from reality, right? And Francis Bacon. It's no surprise that Novel Morganum was created at peak Christianity, where we really had our shit together, and we were making incredible discoveries, and why Britain became a kind of superpower really out of nowhere. Little England became a superpower.
Yeah, this tiny country that changed the world. You think you think about travel is all in English.
Incredible.
It's remarkable.
It is remarkable, and I think that the industrial. I mean, I was born in Manchester, birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, and it's no surprise that where we saw peak Christianity, so this powerful cultural technology, we really got it together after hundreds and hundreds of years of constant cultural reinforcement. We had this incredible innovation explosion, right? And the Industrial Revolution, and it just exploded, and Britain just literally, if you think about the fall, when the Romans left Britain, for example, around the 4th century or 5th century, early 5th century, the Romans had been in Britain for 400 years. And then one day they said, right, that's it. We're now in trouble. We're in decline, and we're off, and good luck. See you later. And so, it's like people don't understand the continuity of this. So, and that's where, kind of civilization cycles come into the equation, because, what you see is that Britain kind of disintegrated, and you had this kind of the Angles, the Saxons, the Vikings, etc., all poured in, and it took a really long time for us to get our acts together, right, and to actually drive the Vikings out. The Normans came, and if you think about Britain, we entered into a protracted dark age for nearly 600 years, the fall of Rome to the Battle of Hastings, right, and then it was only gradually that once we'd started to really practice Christianity and really believe and translated the Bible, biblicalism, and so on and so forth, things started, and that's why I call Christianity a very powerful, effective, proven cultural technology.
Yeah, it's great.
Think about I try to explain what it must have been like for people living in the ancient world, having to deal with a world where suddenly Rome was no more. I mean, Rome had stood for 1,000 years, right? So, and then all of a sudden it was gone. So it was such a cultural shock, and people had regressed so bad, so far, that even money went out of use. So trade collapsed by 98%. People resorted to bartering, and it took. And I think what happens is that our temperamental set point as a species is very low. Our natural inclination is to be, kind of a pagany hunter-gatherer, right? So round the campfire, grunting away. It's not a natural thing to be, but it's not a natural thing to be civilized. It requires a lot of constant cultural reinforcement to really become advanced, and farming and sophisticated political systems and advanced economies. All of that came from the Judeo-Christian kind of biblical ethos, which is incredible to think that the technological, the industrial technological informational economy came from this kind of load of this nonsense, or if you're Richard Dawkins, you'll say that the Bible and Christianity, these are ancient relics from the distant past. No, they're actually the forge with which our civilization was created and became so powerful, right? So that's why I think that we're cycling through again. I don't think that it's possible to kind of, we're not going to be able to save everybody. I think that, a lot of conservatives
it's
yeah,
the ship is going down. It's
ship,
to me,
yeah.
The way I look at it, and part of the reason for doing this interview is, to me, it's this issue of making people aware,
right?
And those that then say, yes, this is the reality, can then take the appropriate steps.
Right.
Because I think there are so many people who just don't want to hear it anyway. And they, like in Australia, because it's been so prosperous, I always say to my clients in my financial planning business that anyone born since World War II has only really known prosperity. And so this whole idea that things can go bad it's so uncomfortable, because they think of themselves flying on their next European holiday. Don't, and so they just can't face what's going on.
That's right. Well, I think the answer to that is, first of all, it's important to be anchored in reality, and that there is a base reality, and it is absolute. And if you deviate from it, you're going to fail. So I think the important thing is, first of all, you got to, ensure your psychological defenses are not overwhelmed. That's number one. So you've got to find these intellectual, as we're doing now, and creating, these intellectual sanctuaries and places of refuge, right, where we can get good quality information about what is actually going on. And that's the essence behind a lot of what I do. And in fact, a lot of what I do the last year or so has been test content, just to kind of gauge sentiment. And actually, I've found that a lot of people now, I used to get a lot of pushback, like exactly as you said, don't be so pessimistic, everything is great, everything will be better because everything's been better previously. But what I find is a lot of, the more and more, I get very little pushback, and it's quite surprising given the kind of, I really don't pull any punches. I call it autistic unfiltered truth. And it seems to really resonate with a lot of people now. And what I say is, look, you've got to understand what's actually going on. We do have the ability to make really accurate predictions based on what's happened historically by turning inwards and studying human nature. So we can make really accurate predictions about how we think society is going to behave, dependent upon where they are or where we are on the cycle. So that's number one. And then the second aspect I say is, and what we're also trying to do is to arbitrage off all of this chaos and hedge against it. And that's where we then segue into things like gold, Bitcoin, land, online, offline networks. So, no man is an island. Find your intellectual sanctuaries, places of refuge. You don't have to, sell the farm immediately. As you know, in financial planning, everybody's circumstances are different, so it's never one size fits all. It's always depends on the individual, the family, or kind of the nucleus of whoever you're talking to. So it's just, I focus on the mega macro stuff. I focus on past, present, future. Well, it's incredible, really, because first of all, what I would say is that everything that's happening has happened before. So there is nothing that's happening today that hasn't happened historically, and I think that's the kind of big or the most obvious idea that I think is important to get across.
It's very biblical, by the way, because the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun.
Right, and it's so true. There is nothing, and of course it's all there in the Bible, and really what I've found is that we are the common denominator. So, and even though we've got sophisticated technologies and kind of medieval institutions, sophisticated technologies, we're still the same. We're still impacted in the same way. And I am a subscriber to this idea that civilizations are cyclical. I have quite a good brain for it. I think that, if you think about kind of the different ways of thinking about things, seeing the world, there are those who are very logical, very analytical, very linear in terms of their thinking. And then, but I think in order to be a good civilization cycles analyst, you need to be a bit more of a lateral thinker, right? So you need to be able to synthesize past, present, future, kind of pattern recognition, detection, connecting the dots, and I think if you can do that, then you begin to you do see more. This idea that civilizations just keep growing, rising ad infinitum is just does not seem to be true. And what's interesting is even technologists and brilliant minds like Elon Musk have started to kind of pick this up. He's talked about, if you listen to him, he's talked about this idea that civilization can go backwards as well as forwards, and we could quite easily end up in a dark age. So I think that's
it's interesting. You did a post on Robbie Williams, and even a musician, he's worked it out. Even so, I think there is a growing sense, this is just not right where we're all heading. So
yeah, I think so, and I think but there's always hope, there's always faith, there's always a promise that and of course again the book of Daniel, the kind of Bible, it's all there. The no matter how bad things are going to get, and I would probably hazard a guess that things are going to get a little bit more crazy. As levels of stress and anxiety rise throughout the general population, what you'll find is psychological defenses being overwhelmed. And once psychological defenses are overwhelmed, you do start to see kind of crazy stuff that you really question. And you think, am I, is it me going crazy, or are we seeing this kind of mass psychosis? And I think we've started to kind of see that. We had the kind of hysterical overreaction, to my mind, re the pandemic.
That was certainly my view. Yeah.
And so, like I said, at each stage you have 9/11, 2008 global financial crisis, the pandemic, the kind of war in Ukraine, this whole net zero phenomenon, the whole kind of so there are all of these kind of warning shots across the bow really as we cycle through, and there are a lot of people who can sense this great disturbance in the force, but perhaps they're not able to make complete sense of it. And that's really where we come in, and just to try to say, look, this is how civilizations work. These are the mechanics. These are the rules which are universal, and they apply to any civilization. And this is perhaps this is what's happened in the past, and this is how we've interpreted it, and this is what we think will happen in the future. And so what we're trying to do is just be seismological or sociological seismographs, just detecting events and trying to help make sense of them as they unfold.
Oh, that's great. Well, look, what do you say? Like, thinking, obviously, there's the rise and there's obviously the fall. What are some of the common factors that cause a civilization to rise and improve?
It's really interesting. All civilizations begin as a culture. If you think of Thomas Cole's Course of Empire, you have the kind of Arcadian phase. If you think of the evolution of life, single cells, multi-cells, transition from ocean to land, plants to animals, mammals, consciousness, understanding, what's actually going on. So you need to find the right kind of social networks, whether it be online, offline. I think that always helps. And that's why I'm a big fan of social conservatism. It's one thing to kind of run off and head to the hills, but no man is an island. I think that it makes sense to join these intellectual networks, and you'll find that a lot of them will start to manifest and materialize, and in fact are doing all over the world in response to a lot of this chaos. Because most people, the good news is that most people actually are quite sane, ordinary, believe in common sense. They're not interested in kind of craziness, but you'll find that we've entered this kind of cycle of crisis. And I do believe that there are big mega macro events, geostrategic events that are taking place that will accelerate this kind of. It will seem like we're lurching into one crisis after another, and I think the frequency and cycle of crisis will begin to increase. So I think that's what I always advise. Just find your social networks. There's plenty of them around. There's a lot of good quality information out there. Stay away from mainstream media. They're absolutely terrible. You will not get the truth from mainstream media. In fact, if you go to mainstream media these days, you will be misinformed. Severely misinformed.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the great thing. A lot of information is kind of decentralized now, and it's easily found.
I was going to say just lastly, because one of the things on your post that I saw was around underground churches. As you know, I think it was a pastor you saw interviewed. So I was thinking, what do you see as the role of Christianity in the future? What role will it play?
So it's great. I mean, so I've actually got pulled the book out. So I don't know if you've read Rob Dreer's.
Oh yeah, no, I've read it. Benedict Option.
A strategy for Christians in a post-Christian world. So I think it's there's a couple of things that, like I said, nothing's happening now that hasn't happened before. So we can open the history books, we can go back, we can say, okay, well, how is it that why did St. Benedict of Nursia head for the hills, and what did he do, and why did he do it? So there's plenty of that's the great thing about the world that we're living in today. If you think about it back then, as Rome was starting to disintegrate, and really that's the kind of the big parallel that I think we should be focusing on and equating ourselves to, the modern West versus Roman civilization. They did not have access to all of the kind of information and networks that we do. Here we are now, yakking away, talking about this. Where even a few decades ago this would not have been possible. So I think that's absolutely, I think it's absolutely incredible. And I think that let's say, okay, there's a good probability we could be heading to some kind of a dark age for a myriad of different reasons. There's also a good possibility that we can shorten it, pretty quickly. We don't have to kind of sit in a 500-year dark age figuring out what to do or being oblivious to it. So I think that I think that faith is going to be really, really important. I think it's definitely a protective shield. Put on the armor of God. And what I've found is that there's, believing Christians are already there. They're already part of these kind of social groups and communities and networks, online, offline. But there's a lot of people who also, atheists and kind of seculars who identify with Christianity, but perhaps they don't know how to come back. So I think that's going to be quite interesting, and I do think that we will see the rise of underground churches that are preaching the gospel, kind of still believe in biblicalism. Not that I don't understand how you can have Christianity without biblicalism, but that's what the Church of England is trying its hardest to do that, and we would expect to see that again. This dilution of Christianity, this kind of, it's like an attack on it from the insipid attack on the inside. Like I said, I think that the key is to find, first of all, if you're in a position to find these what I call fortress citadels, kind of biblical citadels, go there. If it's not practical for whatever reason, find online networks. What we'll start to see is an increase in online networks. I think we'll start to see that again, and these will be organic. So I think there'll be plenty of networks, that Christians and libertarians and freedom lovers and those that believe in sovereignty will be creating in response to this great disturbance.
And it's happening, and you can see it's already emerging everywhere. There's all these pockets coming up.
That's
around
right.
The world.
There is. So that's what I always say. That there will be plenty of options and plenty of choice, and it really depends. How. I mean, we've seen Christianity be persecuted, heavily in the past, and many parts of the world, it's that kind of Christianity. Christians are being heavily persecuted today. We're seeing it now in the West, more so. I think certainly in Europe. I think Europe in particular is in a lot of trouble because. I think America, like I said, they will probably balkanize. We'll probably see some rigid form of Christianity emerge in many parts of America. I think it's a good thing. But I think Europe really has a lot of problems. I think that I mean at this rate, I think by the turn of the century, Europe could be the 1400-year war between the Islamic world and the Christian world will have reached a conclusion. I think that because if you look at kind of the Islamic world and you look at kind of the Muslims in Europe, the source populations are far larger. They're a lot more resistant to the kind of wokey cultural influences of liberalism and a lot more resistant. European populations will age, they will grow more feeble. And I think that Europe will it's sad to say it, but I think Europe will peter out by the turn of the century. Britain will probably not be far off. I think at this rate. Things can always change. There are always wild cards. You've got this whole AI phenomenon, which is a kind of it's interesting, isn't it? We stopped believing in God. We started to believe in the state. We no longer believe in the state. We now believe in AI, as if AI is the new God, and it's suddenly going to kind of save us, and sometimes that's going to be an interesting one to watch over the next couple of years. I think that there are a lot of smart people who it's kind of the mark of the devil, and so to speak. I think we're unleashing the demon. So I agree with some of the concerns raised by the likes of Elon Musk and others. So that's an interesting one to watch.
It's a fascinating one because I find it interesting. On one hand, it saves you a massive amount of time.
Yeah.
The other day I was doing a job interview, and I thought I need some questions to ask this candidate. And so I went on to it and said, give me 10 great questions to ask someone for a marketing role. And it gave me 10 great questions. It was brilliant. But then on the flip side, I look at it and I think, is this just going to make people more stupid, in the sense they're just going to be dumbed down by it? They're going to be so dependent on it that they can't think for themselves.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The antonym to, I always kind of post this and get this out, that the antonym to artificial intelligence is real stupidity, right? So irrespective of, obviously there are concerns that it's going to become sentient or digital superintelligence, it'll far surpass us and that's it. But like I said, I'm a subscriber to this idea that civilizations are cyclical. They're driven by these. We regress our character, temperament. We regress from our neocortex, which is the thinking part of the brain. The kind of last part of the brain to develop, and that's given us the kind of industrial, technological, informational world around us. Back to our more primeval limbic system, which is the reptilian part, the kind of ancient part of the brain. That's the part that we feel with. So you'll notice this kind of, we're living in this world now where it's all about feelings. It's less about rationality and logic and thought and critical thinking. It's all about feelings, ruled by limbics. And so I think on the one hand, you've got AI growing more powerful, and we're becoming more chimp-like. So it's an interesting dichotomy, I think, that we're facing. So that's going to be a really interesting one to watch. But there's no question that our mean IQ, I mean, take Britain, for example. If things carry on like this, our mean IQ will probably be about 85, which is really low.
That's really low.
By the turn
you're not going to get a lot done with that.
Well, that's what happens when we go backwards and regress. You've got no chance maintaining complex civilization. Things just get harder and harder, and therefore that is why we enter into this kind of really savage, brutal dark age. And that's the kind of utility function behind religions like Christianity, for example. What they do is they rebuild your temperamental scaffolding. And you get to a point where, after constant cultural reinforcement, it actually unleashes our ability to think and to think critically. That's why it's very interesting. If you see this relationship between faith and reason, in fact, from faith we get reason, right? So kind of faith and reason are locked in this war at the minute, and the seculars look at religion and Christianity and they say it's all a load of nonsense. But actually, that doesn't seem to be true. So I think, which is quite ironic, really, and I think that. So I think that if we're not careful, we're kind of going backwards, and at the same time we're unleashing the demon with artificial intelligence. And I think the real skill, especially raising your children, is to think critically. Right, I think that's the greatest gift you can give your kids. Most young kids are not even taught. They don't even read books anymore. Right,
no.
They've not even read a single
sit on
book.
devices. So,
right. So how can you really think deeply about things, problem solve, if you can't even read and you don't have the aptitude to read? So it's a huge, it's a huge problem. I think that the basics still apply, and if you want an advantage, just study the humanities, the classics, read, join these intellectual refuges, sanctuaries, which there'll be plenty that'll be springing up. Faith, biblicalism, and just go back to basics, really, because like I said, I think we've entered the cycle of crises. The frequency and intensity, we'll see an increase, I think, in various, and they will be all kind of interrelated, right? So Ukraine's a classic example. So the conflict in Ukraine, we haven't really touched much on that, but to me, that's just a continuation of the conflict which erupted in 2014, right? So if you think about it, you had Obama, you had Bush Senior, Clinton, Bush Senior, Clinton, Obama, etc. Donald Trump was like this kind of wrecking ball, this kind of stop loss, but he proved way too controversial. They got rid of him, parachuted Joe Biden in, and I was confident that we'd see some form of conflict erupt again, and I bet right that it would be Ukraine, and it did. And as we spoke about, they're not even doing that well. It doesn't look like it's going their way.
It doesn't look at it at all.
No,
the mainstream media says otherwise, of course, but they have a narrative to fulfill to probably get their advertising budgets up.
And that's important, because if you think of it like this, you had Brexit in the UK, which was a wrecking ball, which kind of got the ball rolling. That hang on, this whole liberal world order thing, there's this great disturbance in the force. Shortly after, you had Donald Trump, which is kind of equivalent, but obviously in America they do everything is channeled through the presidency, and then geopolitically the equivalent would have been, it looks like Vladimir Putin, right, in Moscow. Right? He's a geopolitical wrecking ball, right? So he's basically laid the foundation for the end of the liberal world order, and now we can see this new alliance between Russia, China,
the BRICS,
the kind of the indications now that we're starting to see de-dollarization. So we're losing the war on inflation. It's not transitory at all. And I think what will happen is, like Rome, governments can renege on the debts, but more likely that they'll hyperinflate. Inflate. So I think
that's the political. That's probably the way they'll handle it politically.
Yeah, that's right, and it makes no sense. I can understand why they would do that, because the alternative is just, what are they going to do? Just let
everything collapse.
People will be there'll be blood in the street. So that's more likely. I expect them to kind of fire up the printing presses. And if you think about it, the reason that the Federal Reserve was forced to raise interest rates so hard, so fast, the equivalent is like slamming on the brakes. You're not wearing a seatbelt, and the economies go smashing through the front windscreen. I think that the reason the Fed was forced to do that was because, like I said, Vladimir Putin, Russia threw down the gauntlet and said, right, that's it. We're making a stand. We're not allowing you to come up to our borders, and we're just going to obliterate Ukraine, which I don't think he intended to do to begin with. But it's turned out, the Russians are now doing it the kind of Clausewitzian way, which is, let's just grind down and wipe out, Ukrainian forces and obliterate them basically, and we'll just, like a slow creep lava flow.
And it's so tragic, because basically either way I look at it is these Ukrainians citizens, but also these young people going off to war. They're just cannon fodder. It's just disgraceful. They're just being wiped out.
Yeah, it is disgusting. It's disgraceful, and I think that's why I am a proponent of this idea that there should be a multipolar world order, because it's happening. It's coming whether we like it or not. I think that this idea of unipolarity, it's over. And if we're not careful, one of the reasons I'm a proponent of this idea that, look, we should, first of all, there are other civilizations. We've left this third way of liberalism. We've entered a world based on civilizations now, civilizationism. And actually, we should hope for a multipolar world order, because if we're not careful, if America continues on this path, it's going to face plant financially. And if it does that, we will be at the mercy of a powerful alliance, Russia, China, in the same way that other societies and civilizations were at the mercy of Britain and America, right? The kind of Anglo-Saxon world order, and we got other countries and civilizations to do what we wanted them to do, and woe betide them if they didn't. So I can see a time where the shoe is on the other foot.
Yeah, I think it's a frightening reality.
We've dished it out for so long, and it's, well, you've dished it out for so long now.
It's our turn. Yep.
Yeah. Now the shoe's on the other foot, and suck it up. So that, to me, I think that's what that's the consequence of a declining or a decaying empire. And as you know, you don't need to be a particular expert to understand this. If you look at 4,000 years of civilizational history, and there's some wonderful maps out there, and there's some great content. There isn't a single one that's managed to. I mean, apart from India and China, they've got a continuous streak of history for thousands and thousands of years. But every single empire that has ever been has dissipated and decayed, and risen, zenith, and fallen, and America's no different. Absolutely no different than any other empire. So I think that's the big idea, the big story, the big narrative. This idea that America is paralleling Rome for the same underlying physiological reasons. And how do we best cope with that? I think that the Christians have a really good chance, because we just go back to basics, right? Go back to what we did before, right? Yeah. So we've got it's all there. It's not like you have to reinvent the wheel. As you said, it's all kind of all of the it's all there in the Bible. You just got to open it up and start reading. All of the wisdom is in there.
Absolutely. So well, it's been fascinating talking to you, Daniel, and great to meet properly. And it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and look forward to connecting again in the future.
Thanks very much.